Hello, and welcome to the fourth episode of Let's Learn Blades in the Dark. In this episode, we will discuss consequences and harm. So consequences and harm follow from action rolls, and they're determined in the following ways. They follow from the fiction, so what was established in the prior scenario, what was established during the action roll, right? What is the situation the characters are in? What are they trying to do? The style and the tone of the game. So this is referring to the general tone of the game that has been established by the players and the GM in discussion. So if you're going for a swashbuckling type game, then maybe the consequences are not that severe. However, if you are going for a much more grimdark tone for your game, then maybe the consequences are very severe and the game is very deadly. So this is open to the group to determine the style and tone. And finally, there is the position and the roll results. And if you want to see how position connects to consequences, then check the tables on page 23 of the book. So next we have the types of harm and consequences. There are 5 of them: reduced effect, complication, lost opportunity, worse position, and harm. And we'll go through these in sequence. So reduced effect, this consequence essentially reduces the effect level of the PC's action by 1 after all other factors are accounted for. So what this means is after you have gone through the entire action roll sequence, the player has declared what they're doing, they've determined their action rating, the GM has set the position and effect, bonuses have been applied, and the roll result has been seen. Then after all that is finished, the GM, as a consequence, can opt to reduce the effect level of the PC's action by 1. So from great to standard to limited, right? That is what is available here with reduced effect. You can also get a complication, and I apologize, but the description of this part of the rules I found to be quite unclear in the book, and so I've tried to kind of clean it up and codify it, but it is a little bit hazy. So if you think there's something wrong with my interpretation of the rules, then please let me know in the comments. But we begin with a minor complication, and this can be a minor fictional complication, such as the player character stumbles, or the player character is winded, or something like that. Nothing too severe. It could also be +1 heat, and we will talk about heat in a subsequent video, or 1 clock tick on a danger clock, and we're going to talk about clocks again in a subsequent video. Next we have a normal complication. That could be a standard kind of fictional complication. Again, nothing too severe, but something that will put the PC off balance on their back foot, that kind of thing. Or it could be +1 heat again, or 2 clock ticks on a danger clock, or a new clock entirely. So what does that mean? It means that if you don't have a danger clock active to represent some kind of impending danger that the PC is entangled in, you can start a new one at 0 ticks. Or if you do have one, you can tick that clock 2 times. And a standard clock will have about 4 segments on it. But depending on the situation, that may be more 6 or 8 even. Then finally, we have serious complications. So these are severe fictional complications, like the PC is sent flying into a chasm and they have to somehow survive, right? It's a very dramatic complication. Or they could take 2 heat, or 3 clock ticks, or maybe a new clock with 2 ticks. I'm not entirely sure because the rules are very vague about this. So that is my best guess at how the rules ought to work. But again, if you think that interpretation is incorrect, please let me know. All right, so let's move on then to talk about this point here. You never negate a successful roll with a complication. So what this means is if the PC is chasing a bandit or some other NPC that they want to subdue, and they need to catch up to them. That is their action. They're trying to catch up to the bandit and grab a hold of them. You can't, as a complication, say, actually they get away, right? Because when the PC succeeded on their roll, they gained the right to achieve what they were trying to achieve. What you want to do is add a complication that is additional to their success. So maybe, yes, they catch up with the bandit, however, now they're in a fist fight with them, right? That is a complication. It adds some kind of interesting new twist to the situation rather than negating what the player said they wanted to do with their action and succeeded on. So again, that is being conscientious of the conversation that is developing through interaction with the rules. Now let's continue here to lost opportunity. This pushes play to a new action roll with a different action rating. And what I mean by that is, for example, the PC fails at picking a lock using the Tinker action rating, so they try to open the door by kicking it down instead, using Wreck. So essentially, one action rating was used for the first action roll. It was not successful, and so the player character has opted to try a different approach. So the opportunity to use Tinker is gone, and we've moved on to the opportunity to use Wreck. That's what happens with lost opportunity. Next, we have worst position. The next action roll is taken at a worst position. That's all there is to it. So if you were in a controlled position, then you move into a risky position. If you're in a risky position, you move into a desperate position. And harm. This is the big one. So harm is a long-lasting debility or death. And it's similar to consequences in Fate. Now, I specifically put that in scare quotes because I want to emphasize that consequences in Blades in the Dark are everything except harm that follows from, a roll, right? It's consequences and harm. Whereas in Fate, consequences are kind of the substitute for what harm is in Blades in the Dark. So this is very confusing. And I think that's why, there's one reason why it's written as consequences and harm. It's to emphasize these things are set apart. Also, harm is important because harm is the road to character death. Okay? That's why it's separate from all of these other consequences. If you take enough harm, your character can die. And that means it's something that players will tend to resist more than other consequences. So let's take a look at how the harm system works. All right, so you will see this image that has been reproduced from the book that shows the chart for harm that you might find on your character sheet. And you'll see it has 3 rows, 1, 2, and 3. The first row indicates lesser harm. The second is moderate harm, and the third is severe harm. And which type of harm you are going to take is determined by your position and roll result. And of course, whether the GM decides to inflict harm, right? That is not necessarily something they have to do. It's up to them. So you'll also notice at the end here, there are these gray boxes, and they say reduced effect, -1d, and need help. So the way this works is you start at the left-hand side of the track you need to fill in. So, for example, the left-hand cell for lesser harm, here it's been filled in with drained. So you don't just mark, I took a harm. You have to mark in, just like in Fate, you mark in what kind of harm you took. And again, this encourages conversation. It encourages the players and the GM to decide, okay, well, they took one lesser harm, but what does that mean in the fiction we have established? It makes things a little bit more interesting than take 2 HP damage, right? That is less interesting than actually specifying the kind of harm that the player character has suffered. And once you fill out a row, so if you take drained and battered, and then, well, first you get the effect at the end. So if drained and battered are both filled in, you get reduced effect on your rolls going forward until your harm has been cleared up. But if a track is filled, you move up to the next level. So let's say drained, battered are both filled in on the first harm track, lesser harm, and I take one more lesser harm. That means I need to fill in a moderate harm. And you can take 2 of those. If you take those both, you get -1d going forward till your harm's been cleared up. And then you'll see under severe harm, there is only one cell. You can only take one severe harm before you go to, you need help. You're down, right? The only way you can do anything in this situation is to push yourself with stress. If your third harm track is filled and you take a severe harm, you move up to the final level, which is fatal harm. It is catastrophic permanent harm. And this can include death of the character. So if you want to see some descriptions of what sorts of harm you might fill into these boxes, there are descriptions of all the different harm levels and what kinds of actual harm they imply on page 31 of the book. So check that out if you want to see some examples. All right, so that is going to do it for this episode. In the next episode, we are going to move on to discuss attribute and action ratings. I'll see you then.